9:10 here, Big 550, KTRS. We wake up this morning to the news that there is a group that wants to, or at least explore the idea of privatizing Lambert Airport. Among that group that was in Washington, D.C. yesterday was Mayor Slay and our next guest, Travis Smith. Travis Brown, I'm sorry. Travis, welcome to Big 550, KTRS.
Smith
Brown. Who's Travis Smith? Travis Brown. Good morning. Welcome to the show. In terms of full disclosure, before we get going, you run a number of things, including First Rule, and the easiest way to explain our relationship is you are our landlord. Is that safe to say?
They tell me that you produce shows here every weekday.
That is correct. So it is a landlord-tenant situation. I wanted to get that out in front so everybody
Fair
knows.
enough. Yep.
Everyone knows. You complain all you want, but that's our relationship here.
We apologize on his behalf.
All right. You were in Washington, D.C. with Mayor Slay yesterday. Mayor Slay is days away from leaving his term as mayor. You're sort of out talking about this. What's the idea of privatizing Lambert Airport? Let's start there.
So the big vision here, what we would say is really sort of inspired by the original Colonel Lambert's vision, is to make this a world-class airport where operating revenues, can be defined as best in class, not just in the region, but in the world. A lot has changed in the global condition of airports, and a big trend in that regard, especially outside the U.S., where arguably the best airports now exist in the world, is the use of private shareholders or mixed-use public-private partnerships or fully privatized airports. I was stunned to learn when we began research into this kind of effort that 40 of the top 100 airports in Europe are, work with a private shareholder or, fully privatized. So what does that mean to St. Louis? It means that we've gone through and endured a lot of transitions over the last 100 years, over the last 20 years. The mayor's been around the last 16. It's been 11 years since we built the largest public works project in Missouri's history, the W1W, $1.1 billion runway on 1129.
Still sitting there waiting to be used.
I would say it's waiting for a space shuttle to land, except I feel old now saying there's no longer the space shuttle program.
What's a space shuttle?
But it's big enough and significant enough for international cargo, certainly greater capacity in airlines. That hasn't happened the way we hoped it would.
Right.
16 years ago, almost the time that Mayor Slay began, we had the dehubbing process and reorganization process. The city, in fact, took back personal property and hangar assets from the failed TWA experience that led into American Airlines. This is not the only thing that's happened over this airport's history. The last 100 years, about every generation, we had to reimagine, what was best for that facility. Colonel Lambert started this airport as a private airfield. Part of the reason it's outside the city, but owned by the city residents, 17 miles away, is back in the day they needed a place far and removed and away for safety reasons, security reasons. It's a grass strip. Colonel Lambert, if he were alive today, whose name is still around, he went on his last week of life in 1946, I believe. The Post-Dispatch and others said, we're really sorry we didn't fulfill more ambition and more boldness with what you saw for our airport infrastructure. He was a private aviator, had a very strong commitment to not just being a part of the transportation infrastructure, but leading the infrastructure. We know that public-private partnerships today are helping do that. This is a first step in a marathon that will have to take a year and a half to complete.
You went to Washington, D.C. to sort of ask, as the papers explained today, to just sort of start the process to ask to what? To study it?
Let's break this down in spring training camp analogies, since we're a baseball town.
Sure.
This is similar. We file the preliminary approval process with the FAA. This is a highly regulated space. The FAA has jurisdiction from a 1997 law that's been on the books for 20 years, and a lot of conditions and security things that must be met. It's subject to their approval, subject to a majority of our airline approval that use the airport, and subject to local approval, in this case, city approval in some kind. We went to file that first step, which is like going to Jupiter, Florida, and saying, I want to play Major League Baseball. put me in, coach. Give me a chance to play regular season. We have the entire season that follows if we qualify. In about a month, the FAA will respond to that early filing and say, okay, we understand your commitment. We'll give you a chance. You have to follow this very tedious process to get your local approval, get your federal approvals in place. That's what we've embarked on yesterday. It means that there will be a lot of other responsibilities for our community to organize that vision. It's at least a two-stage process as we envision it. One, to qualify who's interested worldwide in helping us draw up a new vision for this.
Right.
And then the second phase, the more important phase that ultimately goes to our local approvals and federal approvals, is getting a qualified RFP of people who are serious about bidding on this opportunity.
All right, let's get a couple questions out of the way here. Travis Brown, you are very much affiliated with Rex Singfield. This is part of Grow, Missouri. Do you have any...
Missouri Inc. Yep.
Grow, Missouri Inc. Do you or Rex have any financial interest in making money off this transaction?
No, we're bringing this at no taxpayer expense because we want the upside to be winning a better vision. We have 3 objectives that are filed in this report. The first is to be good for the airport. The airport needs, optimized revenues through diversification, through innovation that comes from the private sector, and through better utilization of underutilized land assets around it. The second objective filed in this report is to make sure that we can, take that capital that is held up in that project and use it for other non-airport uses. We're talking about more than $1 billion of that potential going to other assets that could be transportation related or
explain that. Somebody would pay up to $1 billion to own or to lease the airport?
Typical structure here is very significant partnership with a private operator. They would either pay all up, similar to a lottery proceed, they would pay either all up front over a 40-year lease back. That's typical, or they would pay periodic payments.
Right.
So if you do periodic payments, currently the benefit outside of the use of the airport back to city residents who own the airport is generally about $6 million a year back to the city general revenue.
Right.
Unrestricted amounts after you filter out all
the airport makes $6 million for the city.
If these were periodic payments over 40 years, you're looking at 4 to 10 times more than what we get from that transfer now.
Okay, why would a private company be able to generate that type of revenue and the city can't do it themselves?
They are accessing international capital markets with their own risk premiums attached in exchange for their ability to innovate and enforce a commercial discipline and transfer other functions that typically government functions don't do that well themselves. That's the whole point of it. What are we talking about here? If we are successful in the initial approval, we're talking about international operators, who are very focused in this boutique area. They understand the regulations that they have to protect. They understand what we would want as consumers that would make it for a better airport experience. They also understand the negotiations that would likely take place with cargo operators and other non-aeronautical revenues. They may understand the real estate holdings and better ways to utilize those assets. What government, and in my view, at Grow Missouri Inc., government has done a great job of assembling the land that's large enough with a lot of history over the last 100 years, and government has done a good job holding that bond debt and issuing that responsibly and getting those costs down. What government is typically not good on its own at doing is understanding the private sector innovations that are necessary in airport operations. These operators know that. They have very sharp pencils, so they would not put out more than $1 billion on a potential qualified bid unless they were very serious at that getting some of their own returns back.
Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, is on the show every Tuesday, Thursday here. He said earlier today on the show that this is some type of way to generate funds so that Rex Singfield could then go after the earnings tax and get rid of the earnings tax and replace this money with the airport with doing away with the earnings tax.
There are an infinite number of things you could do when capital program is transferred out of what it's currently bound in today. Today it's in the ground underneath that runway that we're not using nearly as much as we should.
Right.
Today it's held into a series of bond accounts that can't be diverted out and tomorrow, if that was successful, we're talking about a year and a half process, a lot of public input, a lot of drafting that would either be done by ordinance and or charter amendment. The non-airport uses, or if it comes out of that program, are unrestricted. That could go to debt relief or tax relief. It could go to municipal infrastructure. We are aware that a lot of city local leaders and metro-wide leaders have a lot of needs that are being unmet. And if that includes North-South Metrolink, that's a potential.
So what you're saying is the money taken from this buy
Yep.
could be distributed any way the Board of Aldermen and the mayor ultimately decide, and the community.
Subject to all the local necessary approvals and the input from that process, subject to a qualified bidder saying, here's what we think it will generate, then, yeah, it could be the capital that transfers out either up front or over time can be used for other purposes. Let me give you a real example.
Sure.
San Juan, Puerto Rico went through this exact program, the airport privatization pilot program. Several years ago, that resulted in a combination of things for the city of San Juan, who owned the airport there. They got an upfront payment over $600 million, so that was a pretty big windfall.
Right.
They had a lot of other issues they wanted to build out. They also, with the operator, came in and did a lot of terminal upgrades and expansions of the real estate facility under the operator's watch, and consumers benefit from that. And then third, they got a revenue share agreement over a lifetime of that that is continuing to pay dividends in an otherwise harsh economy. They also, from the operator, saw new airlines coming in with new direct flights that were never negotiated. So that's a good example of what's working. San Juan is smaller than our airport here locally. So we have every reason to believe that this is a substantial opportunity to free that capital. The responsible use outside of that airport is to be determined, and how that would go.
A couple of years ago, that China hub was a big issue. What does, if this is what you're talking about, private entities would come in and quote unquote build a China hub because of the regional and geographical benefits of where St. Louis is?
I think we've had a lot of good effort by our airport management and operations thus far. China air cargo and other cargo opportunities are clearly identified in our strategic plan by the Airport Commission for the next 5 years, and they've been there probably for the last 10. We haven't realized that full potential, and most of that potential comes from private sector operators familiar with transportation and logistics in that specialized space. There are some government functions that can assist and accelerate that. Cold chain storage on the regulations, getting the airport approved for a port of embarkation with other dual customs facilities. Those things help. That's a good function for public management systems and government. What private operators are good at doing is understanding who are the future operators and suppliers that would want to use what we have, a tremendous resource. We're in the middle of the country. We're on those logistical routes by air, by water, by rail. We connect. The original design of that airport was to be that reliever for Chicago Midway and Dallas on the American Airlines pipeline. That's still a good idea. We just need to innovate.
So Republicans, Democrats can't agree on what day of the week it is, but liberals and conservatives all agree that where St. Louis is, the future, the next 20, 30, 50 years, are the rivers, the rails, the roads, the airport, and the fact that we are in the middle of the country, and the middle of from the tip of South America to the Colorado Rockies. We're in the middle of it all.
That's right, and we understand how to build things, grow things, and transport things. We ought to be able to do that and realize a larger vision here. We have a lot of steps, and the public ultimately has to decide whether this is a good plan here locally. But subject to those approvals and all the other things that we have to continue to do under the FAA's guidance, we think this is worth a shot. It could be a huge opportunity. It will give us one thing, back to baseball. It will give us the best at-bat potentials to talk to the leading minds in the world that make these kind of investments, to operate these kinds of facilities. Even if we go through the entire process at no taxpayer expense and something decides to get on the off-ramp from this, we will still learn a tremendous amount by going through this. We are privileged, McGraw, that this town and this region has always had private philanthropists stand up.
Right.
In the case of life sciences, we had the Danforth Foundation stand up, Plant Science Center. Tremendous. In the case of our own Arch, we had not even the National Park Service, but we had to go out with City Arch River.
Right.
And private folks, very generous, have raised over $300 million for that effort.
Right.
We're trying to play our small part here in getting a better vision, again, with another asset that we think is important for the region.
So since this has gone public, and since you were in D.C. yesterday with Mayor Slay and you met with the FAA and whoever else you met with yesterday,
Yep.
What has been the reaction? You mentioned off the air that your phone is blown up. Who are you hearing from, and
We're hearing from the
reaction?
right folks. We're hearing from the people that are, necessarily interested and already involved in the airport and airline industry. That's important. None of this goes forward without their input, counsel, and direction as to things they like, the things that they would like to see change, and what conditions would go forward. We're hearing positive words from our congressional leaders, our state and county leaders. I think people understand, as Mayor Slay has put out, that the airport here could use a shot in the arm. And we also understand that we've been patient with the other things that have been tried. And it's time now to see what else might be out there.
If this is sold to and some public-private partnership, does that mean I'm going to get my luggage faster through the carousel?
I will personally make that request.
Oh, we have it here. Breaking news here on the Big 550. He's known throughout the building as Travis Smith, but he's known for the rest of the world as Travis Brown with Grow Missouri Inc. So what's the next step here? What do you do now?
We filed the preliminary application. We begin the conversations with the airline industry and those that are, looking and reviewing that. Typically, it takes about a month before the FAA even speaks to the merits of what we filed.
Right.
So we go through that process and see what's happening. We qualify for this marathon. They give us a tag, give us a slot. Really, we're just reserving a slot for this option. This federal law has a cap on only 10 airports at a time. They consume 5 already. So we think we're putting St. Louis region at the front end of the line here.
Who are the 5 who have already gotten this?
There's a variety of small airports, medium airports that are out there scattered across the country.
Any big ones? Any...
The most recent one that's gone through this is Westchester, New York. There was also JFK Terminal. That was a partial expansion using some of this. And then some small airports. San Juan, Puerto Rico, of course, going through the program.
Right.
Others, it's not an easy process. So part of our function was to try to find the best legal minds that understand the unique regulatory law, try to understand all the different covenants and restrictions that go in something of this size. You've got nearly 3,000 acres and a lot of responsibilities up there at that facility, hundreds of employees. A lot of conditions go behind what you have to maintain. You got to keep it open. You got to keep it secure. You got to keep it running. It's got to be fair to airline industries. And you got to follow all that. You can't change union contracts. There's a lot of things that you have to understand. So we try to take that burden so that, bottom line, the Cardinal Nation can beat the Cubs this year.
So you said it before. Grow Missouri Inc. is funding this, and so there's no taxpayer dollars for this study and for this process.
We filed all the legal and the financial advisory work needed to get to this step, and we expect to carry this through if we have milestones there. We're doing that in conjunction with the Office of Mayor.
Travis Brown, good stuff. You're always welcome here. Thanks.
Thank you.
And in terms of full disclosure, Travis Brown is officially, as we decided, the landlord here. So it's a landlord-tenant relationship. Travis, thanks.
Thank you.